Hey, oh, okay. Hey, how's everybody? I thought there wouldn't be anybody here because I thought you would all be like on vacation. Good to see you. Oh, there you are. Hey, Andrew. I'm trying to think if I have anything to tell you. We have class next week, and then we're off the next week, but we do have class next week. A couple of things. One, I was on the podcast today. If you know the Between Sundays podcast. And oddly, and can I just tell you something that everyone I think in this room, except maybe our friend back at the back there, I don't know about, but I used to be on the podcast and bring music. And they would ask me to bring the stuff that was either moving me right now or things from the past, because I have a long history in the music world. And I always brought stuff that they just didn't expect. Well, guess what has happened? There are no CD players in the church anymore. And so most of the music that I have that's really old or really cool, because I have a lot of music that there's like one CD of it and it doesn't exist anywhere else, because I'm on the inside of something where I can get that one CD, and they can't transfer. There's no way to transfer. So they've stopped asking me to bring music because I always bring CDs. So, and I have a CD player in my car, but I don't have any way to. So anyway, I was on the podcast today, and Marin, who is wonderful, says to me, I just wish there was a way that somebody could just teach the Bible and just go verse by verse and just take their time and just give us everything that they know about. I wish we could do that. And I said, Marin, I've done that since I came to Grace 30 years ago, every Tuesday. And she's like, I said, that's what those notes are that you use when you preach. Because I'm just saying, she has downloaded everything I've ever put into print. She closed the church down paper-wise one day when she printed out Genesis and John in the same day. It's like they just had to shut down the room and let it just keep printing. And she goes, well, I guess I need to come to your class. It's like, hello. That's just how the word doesn't get out. Anyway, I thought that was funny. I think it's on the podcast. I don't know. The podcast isn't, having me on there isn't worth listening to, but it's like, it just struck me as odd that that's what she wanted, and that's what we do. But I think she would like to do that too. So, do the teaching. But anyway, that's for another day. And then, was there anything else I need to tell you? I can't think of it. I'm excited about where we're going. And the problem is we have to finish what we were doing last week, but I'm really excited about where we're going after that, and I don't know that we'll get there. So anyway, here we go. We're at verse 7 in chapter 12. I'll need to read this stuff to set it up, and then we'll go from there. But let me pray for us. Father, again, what an honor it is to study your word together. What a joy it is for me to be able to prepare for this time and to have people that want to hear what your word has to say. I pray that what I say will be something that gives you joy, and that we will take from this what you intended for us to hear from you, and that our hearts will be changed because of our time together. I pray this in your name. Amen. All right, I'm going to just read this. Remember, Jesus had been asked by what authority he does things, and he countered them by saying, what was John the Baptist's baptism's authority, or John the Baptist's authority to baptize, and that got them all in a kimbo, and then he broke into this story. Now, we did the first part of it last week, but I want to read the whole thing just so we have it. And then we'll go from verse 7. It says, a man planted a vineyard. He built a wall around it, dug a pit for pressing out grape juice, and he built a lookout tower. Then he leased the vineyard to tenant farmers and moved to another country. At the time of the grape harvest, he sent one of his servants to collect his share of the crop. But the farmers grabbed the servant, beat him up, sent him back empty-handed. The owner then sent another servant, but they insulted him and beat him over the head. The next servant he sent was killed. Others he sent were either beaten or killed until there was only one left, his son, whom he dearly loved. And the owner finally sent him thinking, surely they will respect my son. But the tenant farmers said to one another, here comes the heir to this estate. Let's grab him and get the estate for ourselves. So they grabbed him and murdered him and threw his body out of the vineyard. What do you suppose the owner of the vineyard will do? Jesus asked. I tell you, he will come and kill those farmers and lease the vineyard to others. Didn't you ever read this in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful to see. The religious leaders wanted to arrest Jesus because they realized he was telling the story against them. They were the wicked farmers, but they went away. They were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. All right, when we stopped last week, we had come to that point where the owner of the vineyard had said he's going to send his beloved son. And he said, surely, or he didn't say surely, he just says, they will respect him. The implication was, if you remember last week, that there is no chance that if they see my son, they will not respond appropriately to his message. Well, the story goes on to say the tenant farmers said to one another, here comes the heir to the estate. Now, I just have to say that the tenant's response in this story, for those of us who know what the end of the big story is about Jesus, we are not surprised that they say, here he comes, let's kill him. Simply because we know the end of the bigger story. But to the first hearers of this story, the response of these tenants to the sending of the son would have been shocking to them. This is like unimaginable behavior, unimaginable. And there's a small point that I want to make in the Greek that actually I think makes a difference. In our NLT, and I don't know what you all have in your translations, it says that they say, in NLT it says, here comes the heir to the estate. Here comes the heir to the estate. And then it says, let's kill him and get the estate for ourselves. Now, here's the problem. The way that the Greek is set up there, the way that Mark actually writes it down, I'll just read it to you. And it says, but those husbandmen among themselves said, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him. Now, I don't know if you notice a difference in that, but there are two ways you can translate that. One is, here comes the heir to the estate. The come word, that word is right in the middle. And so it can go, as the NLT translated it, here comes the heir to the estate. Like they're looking down the road and they see him coming, and so they're just going to go kill him. The other is, this is the heir to the estate, as if he's in front of them, as if they've heard his message. And then they say, come, let's kill him. Now, those are two different things. One is they're watching somehow to see if he's coming. They haven't heard what he has to say, but they're going to kill him. The other says they've heard what he has to say and they decide, we're done with this one, we're going to kill him. Do you see the slight difference there? Now, I think it's the latter one. I think if I were translating this, I would have said that the husbandman, the husbandman said to one another, something like that, or the husbandman said, this is the heir to the estate. Come on, let's kill him. meaning that they had heard him say, I am the Son, I have come from the Father, I have this message for you. He says this is what he wants from you, because that is exactly in line with what happens to Jesus. It isn't that Jesus was coming and everybody sees him and so they're preemptively going to kill him. Does this make sense to you? I mean, I just was thinking about this a lot because I think there's something far more potent about this story, these tenant farmers actually hearing how this beloved Son would speak to them and then killing him, rather than them just going after him generally because they think we can really get it over on him now. Does this make sense? Because I think that the rejection of the Son has to come with having heard the message as it comes from the Father. Because that's the way it actually works. The tenants, we've already read it, Jesus is accusing them of being the tenant farmers, and they have heard what he had to say, and now they want to kill him. And I know that's just almost pedantic, if that's the right word, but it's also odd that they say that we can get the estate to ourselves. Now, a couple of things. In rare occasions, tenants on an estate would inherit the estate if nobody could find anybody who was alive in any possible way related to the original owner of the estate, okay? It's like tenants did not inherit estates. They particularly didn't inherit an estate or take it over when the owner is still alive, okay? And the owner is still alive. If they say, we'll kill him and then we'll get the estate. Now, a lot of scholars, enough that I'm bringing it up, say, well, this is just ridiculous. Clearly, this was just made up. They just made this up later to show Jesus had some sort of prophetic knowledge about what was going to happen to him later because he's so far off of reality. But let's be honest, this is a parable, and parables are not mirror images of reality. They may have aspects in them that do mirror what is real, like he was right about how you make a vineyard, but you don't have to have every detail of a parable be exactly right in order to get the point. Does that make sense? And it still can work, and it can still be something that Jesus said, even if he mentions something that is unimaginable. But let's keep in mind that this is a group of tenants who have terribly injured and killed and kicked out messengers from the owner and refused to pay the part that they owe them. So they're already a bit wacky. This would not happen anyway, anywhere. And I'm sure I told you last week that if somebody did this, the first time anybody said, no, we're not going to pay it, and they beat up the messenger, the soldiers would be there immediately to haul them off on posts, on stakes, it's like they wouldn't put up with it at all in their world. And then it says, let's kill him and get this estate for ourselves. They've gone way too far in their thinking. It says they grabbed him. The Greek word there is a really common Greek word. I'll look it up right here because I want to talk about it a second. The word is labantes. It means, it's like taking. It's sometimes translated taking him, but let me just be more honest about it. It is usually a word that means you grab somebody by force. You steal something by force, you take it away from somebody by force, or you take a person away by force. It's the same word that happens when Jesus gets arrested, by the way. It's all this is a forceful moment. They grab him, and I have a picture of him being right there in front of him, trying to explain to them why they need to pay this, and I represent the landowner, and then it says, and they murdered him. That's really good because there's a difference between killing and murdering. And killing is, Well, no, I'll say it this way. Murdering somebody is always wrong and bad. It's purposeful killing for your own benefit out of anger or wanting something, it's like killing is generally like you do it to animals to eat them, you do it to enemies who are trying to destroy your property, something, your home, something like that. And they murder him. And they throw his body out of the vineyard. Now, the first listeners to Jesus' story, they already knew that these people were going to kill somebody. He said they killed somebody. This would be really weird to them that Jesus is talking like this, that somebody would do this. But when he said, and they threw his body out of the vineyard, it actually says over the hedge. Just like that kind of thing. They threw his body out over. Now, can I just tell you how appalling that statement is? It's one thing to kill somebody. It's another thing to throw their body into a place where they can't be buried. This is just the worst possible thing you could do to somebody. And they're doing it to the vineyard owner's son, throwing his body out of the vineyard so that it can rot in the sun and not be buried. You can just hear the people going, when he says, and they threw him out of the vineyard. What we're getting is a picture of complete and utter disregard for every aspect of the authority of the owner of that property. So much so that they don't even care that his only son, whom he loves, rots in the field on the other side of the hedge. So this is the picture. Now just think a minute about the situation of Jesus telling this story, because the people that came to question him, they were the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. They know where Jesus is going on this, and he has just accused them of being what? Murderers who have absolutely no concept of what you should do at all to show any respect to somebody who has authority over you. This is getting rough. And so they're all taking this in. In this version, it's Jesus says, what do you think suppose the owners of the vineyard will do? Read Matthew. Matthew remembers this a little differently. It's like everybody shouts out, they're going to cover the people all answer. It's like they're going to come and kill him. I'm sure that what actually happened was he said, and what do you think they'll do? It says Jesus asked, and he doesn't give him a chance. It's not a rhetorical question. He's going to jump right in and tell him but I'm sure that everybody started yelling out what they should do, what should happen when Jesus starts to tell him. I'm sure that it all kind of blended together, because this is a very emotional story for these people that are listening. And by the way, we'll go back, and I'm sure I said last time, everybody knew that the vineyard represented Israel. Isaiah 5, 7 and following, I think that's what it is. It's all about the vineyard being Israel and God being his vineyard. It says, well, what do you suppose the owner of the vineyard will do? Jesus asks. And I love this. I'll tell you. And that's essentially what it says. It's like, and I'll bet you could see Jesus' neck is really red. You know, he's like worked up. Because these guys came to what? They came to find some way to get, and this is important in this story and in the next one. What they're trying to do is to get it so that Jesus gets killed without blood on their hands. To get somebody else, the crowd or the Romans or somebody else, to get rid of Jesus. So I'm sure he was worked up. He says, I'll tell you. And then he says, he will come and he will kill those tenants and he'll lease the vineyard to others. I got to stop right there. We know the rest of the story. We actually know 2,000 years of history since this parable was given. We know that in 70 AD, that the Romans came in and they destroyed the temple and they destroyed Jerusalem and they put to death almost everybody who was left. And I don't know if you guys know this, but the Sadducees as an organization ceased to exist after 70 AD because almost all of them were put to death. The only guys left, there were some zealots at the Masada, and then there were some Pharisees who took over the rabbinical teachings in the synagogues because that's where the only place the Jews could meet anymore. But that happened in 70 AD. Also, what happened about the beginning of the first or second century in the church? It went from being a Jewish, primarily religion of Jews following Jesus, and it became almost, after the destruction of Jerusalem, it became almost exclusively a Gentile church. So, lots of people say that when Jesus said, the owner will come and he'll kill those farmers and he'll lease the vineyard to others, they are saying that Jesus is telling this story because he's being prophetic. He's letting us all know that coming is a time when these guys that are running the temple right now are going to be gone and we're going to give it to somebody else. It's either going to be the Romans because they're going to level it, or it's going to be the Gentiles because the Jews aren't going to be part of the church anymore. Now, can I say that's cool in hindsight? But I can't imagine that at the moment, anybody in the crowd was going, uh-oh, he's being prophetic about Jerusalem. He's being prophetic about the church that he hasn't yet started. You see what I mean? I just don't know that at the moment that they'd have been. Now it works in some way as we look back. And it's like I'm probably saying in the notes somewhere, now what is it? And then I say, it's probably all three, because Scripture can function at so many different levels at the same time. It just does. And so often we think something means this, and then we find out later it means this, and we're going to actually see something about that in a moment. It's like all of this stuff is swirling, but in that very moment, all Jesus wanted them to hear was, if you are supposed to be taking care of God's vineyard, chief priests, scribes, elders, and you treat God's vineyard and his messengers with this kind of contempt, which you're doing, you can expect to have some trouble on your hands. I think that's all he cares. And the reason I think he tells them this story, and I think, did I say this last week? Is because I think he wants them to wisen up. He's giving them an opportunity to go, oh, wait a minute. Maybe we need to think a second time about Jesus. Maybe we need to look back at what John the Baptist was all about, and we need to maybe change our minds about this and get in line with what the owner of the vineyard is trying to tell us. Anyway, it's a fairly profound story, but he's not done. Can you put the next passage up for me, Cindy? Then he says this. I love this when Jesus does this. He does this a few times. He says, didn't you ever read this in the scriptures, or haven't you read in the writings, he says. Now, remember who he's talking to. He's talking to the elders who are there because they know what's going on and they've been doing it a long time. He's talking to the chief priests. I mean, the guys that are so good at what they've been doing that they get to live in Jerusalem and work in the temple all the time. And then he's talking to the scribes who all they do is read and copy and discuss text. And they don't have to worry about the New Testament because it's not yet been written. They only have to worry about the Old Testament. And he says, haven't you ever read in the scriptures? That's like a huge cut. In other words, what he's saying is, yeah, I know you've read it, but you've never really paid attention to it. He says, and then what he says is, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful to see. Now that comes out of Psalm 118. It's part of the Hillel. The Hillel are those groups of, that group of 5 psalms in that section of the Psalter that they sang and chanted at Passover. And I've mentioned this before, but this is important because this quote is out of one of the songs that they would have been singing all week. And they'd have been marching through the street. We don't really do that. I don't know. I've never been to Mardi Gras. I don't know if there's any songs that everybody sings at Mardi Gras. I don't know. I was at one time, and everybody broke into Country Road, Take Me Home, West Virginia. And they said, oh, we sing this when we get together all the time because we're all from West Virginia. Anyway, it's like, but it'd be like if they'd been singing that song and then somebody quoted a line out of that to make a point. They'd all know what they were talking about. Now, here's the thing. This seems like it comes out of nowhere. It is kind of odd that he says this about the stone and it just doesn't seem to make much sense in the space where he's talking about it. And also, if you look at that psalm, it kind of sticks out a bit in there too, like where'd that come from? Because the whole thing has been, God has done this for us, and his love endures forever. It's that psalm where it goes, he delivered us from our enemies. His love endures for enemy. He saved us from the throats of hell. His love endures forever. And it just goes on and on. Everything goes like that, like that, like that. His love endures forever. Well, right in the middle of it, we get these 2 lines. And here's the deal. The interpretation of the rabbis of these 2 lines, well, the first one in particular, is that Israel was the stone that the builders rejected and has now become the cornerstone. They thought of it as something to do with the nation. And here's why they thought of it like that. Because Israel was always a little nation of very little importance and was always surrounded by great nations who were always builder nations. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, all these big powers that were building big, important things. And then there's little Israel. And their feeling about this was that the stone that the builders rejected, now we're talking about the nation builders rejected, in other words, said this is very unimportant. This nation is very unimportant. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but Israel generally was situated in the place where all great powers just came through to go somewhere else. And in the process, they would always strip the land of everything, eat all the food, take over somewhat, and then move on because they just found them to be all a bunch of sheep farmers and they didn't want to have anything to do with them. But this stone that they rejected, now we don't know for sure if the word that gives us the cornerstone, if that's there were 2 kinds of stones that we could be talking about here. And it doesn't matter, but I just thought do you want to know about this? Okay. And I know about one of them from digging them up when I was a Roman British archaeologist. But a cornerstone would be a stone that they worked very hard to carve it so that it was at a perfect right angle on 2 sides. The other side wouldn't have to be. It could be anything. But they would carve it off to get the perfect right angle. And they would put it in the ground, and then they would run lines straight off the edge and straight out. And that would give them their walls. And so it's the cornerstone because it's keeping everything in perfect line, so the building will be square so it won't fall down. The weight will be, okay, that's the first. The other thing that it could be, and maybe your translation says capstone, the other could be, and we don't know exactly what it is in this. By the way, this is perfectly quoted from the Septuagint. I don't know whether Jesus actually quoted the Septuagint or whether Mark went and got his Septuagint out and looked at it to make sure he got it. But it's like very rare that you get a quotation from the Septuagint in the New Testament and it's perfect to the original Greek. But this one is perfect to the original Greek. I just thought I'd throw that in. The other is, you know how when you build an arch and then you got to put that stone in there to hold it? Well, once you know what I'm talking about, that stone can also be the same, used for the same word. And then once they have that arch, they can build against it because it can't cave in. Jennifer and I excavated cornerstones. When we, I'll never forget that. Can I tell you this little quick story? There was a building that we were excavating, a Roman building in a town, a small town that we excavated. And we'd gotten the front end of it, the street end, but it didn't have a cornerstone. But we'd figured out exactly the length of two of the walls, but then a creek went through the back of the site. And so I did a bunch of math, and I went out in the field on the other side of the creek, and I said, if we dig straight down here, we're going to hit the cornerstone. And I'll be darned if we didn't dig straight down there, and guess what we found? We found the cornerstone of that building, that they'd actually built it the other direction, and the perfect stone was at the back from the street side. Go figure, you know. That's like one of my great moments in life. If we go 3 feet down right here, we're going to find the cornerstone. And we did. Anyway, what he's saying is, first he's talking, they all think it's Israel. That's what they think when they sing this song. And they sing it, this is the Lord's doing. Isn't it wonderful to see? But Jesus has shifted the meaning. Who's he talking about? He's talking about himself. He's saying, you guys are missing the point. That may be true about Israel, and God may have chosen Israel to be the way that he builds it. But right now, things are really changing. And what's important is the messenger that you're rejecting is the cornerstone upon which God is going to build everything. And he says, and this is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful to see. And they are the very people who are saying, this is not a wonderful thing. And he's saying to them, you need to come to a new conclusion about what's happening right now, and that I am wonderful to see. That's what he's saying. This fits right in. It fits right in with what the psalm is about. Because what? The Lord has done this, and it proves that his love endures forever. And then it says, the religious leaders wanted to arrest Jesus. Again, arrest is a very nice word. Don't think of what happens when people are protesting and they come out, you know, and they sit down on the ground and the police come and they put those little bands on their arms and they walk them away and they're still, no. This is the word for when you grab somebody violently and you drag them away. This is a moment when their deepest anger towards Jesus is coming out. Because they knew he was telling the story, it says against them or about them. It relates to the way, what he has just done. He's not only compared them to the ancient Jewish people who have killed the prophets and were guilty of ignoring the prophets in the past, which brought all kinds of punishment on the nation of Israel, but he's also comparing these leaders who are tasked with the job of taking care of the Lord's vineyard. He's compared them to Gentile builder nations who ignored Jerusalem and Israel. It's like any way that you want to offend them, Jesus has just done it. And so they want to what? Kill him. Because they were the wicked farmers. Now, I don't know that I can express enough how shocking it would have been for some hillbilly Galilean preacher to come into the courts of the temple during Passover and say these things about the leaders of the temple. But that's what just happened. That's what just happened. I'm sure that the crowd itself was thrilled to hear somebody finally say what they were thinking all along. And they were furious. And it says, but they were afraid of the crowd. Again, the leaders of the nation of Israel's religious and political and legal structures were afraid that the people were going to turn on them if they messed with this one guy. Such was their distance from the common people. Now, this whole story starts out with them coming up to Jesus in the halls, in the courts of the temple, and it's like this exciting interaction, and Jesus saying this and that, and it's all this drama, and the whole thing ends with a whimper. It says, so they left him and went away. The language is almost like the, okay, they skulk off. Don't on your life for a minute think that they all felt defeated. They did not feel defeated at all. They just were smart enough to know that this isn't the moment that we need to kill him. We don't need to arrest him when there are all these people around during Passover. The last thing they wanted to do was to create a big ruckus, because who are the Romans going to blame for a ruckus? They're not going to blame Jesus. They're not going to blame the crowd. They're going to blame them for not keeping them all under control. So they don't want to deal with that. And when it says they went away, yeah, but I don't think they went very far, and I think they met up really quickly. Really quickly. This is called a pronouncement story because Jesus has just made a strong pronouncement. And it's in a section where there are a whole bunch of different groups coming to talk to Jesus. And we've had different groups up to now, and we still have a couple of more. The only official organizational people that are left are the Sadducees and the Zealots. Okay? And and if you notice, if you look at the very beginning of the next passage, it says, and they sent, and it says, doesn't it say Pharisees and Herodians? Is that what's next? I'm sorry, I was wrong on that. I was ahead. I was already finishing the story I'm about to talk about when I said the Pharisees. The Pharisees will be in the next story. The Zealots don't show up because they don't have a dog in the Jesus hunt, okay? They are fine with Jesus. They don't care about Jesus. They just want him to win whatever he does. But we've had the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, and next we're going to get Herodians and Pharisees. And then the only other group we have left is the sixth one. It's the Sadducees. And they're going to come in the next story. So everybody's working together. I cannot even imagine what it would be like to know that every possible legal and religious organization that exists is out to kill you. That's Jesus this week at the Passover. Okay. Okay, that's that section. Yeah, you guys we need a break. It's the right time. And then we'll start the next section. The next section is where I've been living the last week. This last stuff I've been doing off of my memory from the week before, but I'm excited about the next one. So let's take 5 minutes and then we'll come back and I'll get excited. his seat. After the first one, he was already mad, but then when he came out, he said the second one, he was like, no, we don't do jokes at Grace Church. Did you know, this is speaking to Dave Rod and jokes, how many of you were here? Were any of you here like this first year of Grace Church? Okay, do you remember when we had a missions night, and we knew that we couldn't get people to come listen to missionaries, so we did a fake Tonight Show, and I put together a band, and Dave Rod was the host, and he had a table, and he came out and he did stand-up? Do you remember that at all? You probably. And the place was packed. Yeah, it was packed, and we had a ventriloquist guy come and do his thing, and Dave had, and then they all went to talk to missionaries, and it was really a success. But he did stand up, and I said afterwards, "You need to talk to a writer before you go." That's what it's like. You need help with that. Anyway, there we have it. All right, are we ready? We're in Mark 12:13. I'll read it. It's a very short passage. Unfortunately for you, I have like 24 pages of notes. So later, the leaders sent some Pharisees and supporters of Herod to trap Jesus into saying something for which he could be arrested. "Teacher," they said, "we know how honest you are. You are impartial and don't play favorites. You teach the way of God truthfully. Now tell us, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or shouldn't we?" Jesus saw through their hypocrisy and said, "Why are you trying to trap me? Show me a Roman coin, and I'll tell you." When they handed it to him, he asked, "Whose picture and title are stamped on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. "Well then," Jesus said, "give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God." His reply completely amazed them. End. Okay. Now, can I just tell you that this is one of those stories, moments in the scripture where there is so much contextually going on here that it's almost impossible to really understand what's happening if we don't go into the details of the background. It starts out, can you put the next passage up for me, Cindy? When we said that the leaders snuck away quietly from Jesus, there is no break in the actual, our Bibles all divide these, but there's no break. And actually the first word is kai, which is the connecting and word. It says they snuck away, or they went away and left him alone, and later is not in the Greek. Okay? Now, clearly it's later. We don't know when, but it's not in there. Everybody puts that in there just to give it some space. But it literally goes, and they left him, and they sent. That's what it says. Now, a couple things about it. It's very clear that the they are the people who have just been talking to Jesus. The subject has not changed. It's still one long Greek connected thing. And so we're talking about these other guys. And it says they sent, and the word for sent is an interesting word because it's the word that gives us apostles. It's a verbal form of the noun for the sent ones. And so now what we have is Jesus with his what? Sent ones, and now these are another group of sent ones who are coming to him. And it says the Pharisees, yes, Pharisees is in the text. It doesn't say supporters of Herod. This is the translators trying to give us some idea of what's going on. But it just says the Herodians. Now, I don't know. We've met them before in chapter 3. They already want to kill Jesus, by the way. But I don't know that I can express enough how much these two groups had wanted to have nothing to do with each other. Also, the people who were in the first batch of people, the people who were the chief priests and the elders and the scribes, they don't want to have anything to do with these people either. The Pharisees, I'll just talk about the Pharisees, and if you've heard me say this, I'm sorry, but it's important to remember this because it fits into the context absolutely. Here, the Pharisees were common people. They were men who were not of the elite. They were well respected by the Jewish people. They were people who had made a decision to join this organization. Pharisees means the separate ones. They had decided to, there are about 5,000 of them, and they join up, they sign in, and they become people who commit to being completely obedient to the law in every aspect that they possibly can. Now, do some of them get off the rails and just get too full of themselves and all that? Yes. But for the most part, most people saw the Pharisees as the one group of religious people they could trust. And the Pharisees were Jewish nationalists. They wanted nothing more than to see the Romans gone. And they wanted to see the Messiah come. And they wanted to see Israel be a nation that was ruled by God himself, and that people were obeying the law, and the nation was cleared out of all the Gentiles who brought uncleanliness to the population. They were serious about being Jews. The Herodians are Galilean Jews. Remember, or I'll explain this in a minute. There had been Herod the Great who ruled over the whole of the area. He ruled over Judea and Samaria and Perea and Idumea and Galilee and Decapolis, and he'd ruled over that whole great big thing. And when he died, first he was having all of his sons put to death, but then he changed his mind at the last minute right before he died, and he let 3 of them live. And he gave each one of them a third, and he gave Archelaus, he gave Judea and Samaria and Idumea, which are, it's like, here's Judea where Jerusalem is, and then Samaria's here, and Idumea is down here. So he gave him the southern stuff. And then he gave Antipas, he gave Galilee, and parts of where Tyre and Sidon are. And then he gave Philip, Decapolis, and all the stuff that's off to the northeast. Okay? The Herodians were supporters of Antipas, who ruled in Galilee. And they knew that Herod, they called him Herod, because that's just kind of like his last name. They knew that he was a client king of the Romans, but he was Idumean, but the Idumeans had been forced under the earlier Jewish state, under the Maccabees. They'd been forced into Judaism, and so Herod claimed to be Jewish, even though he had no Jewish blood in him. He just like had followed the rules and so they saw him as a king who could take over like the father had done before, and at least bring everybody under a Jewish ruler. Now, the Herodians were also absolutely pro-Roman, because the Romans, they wanted to separate themselves politically from Rome, but they wanted the Romans to stick around to keep the peace. So when we talk, now think about this, the Herodians are Galilean for the most part, supporters of the Roman Empire to keep their buddy who's keeping them all in a place of authority and prestige. Do you see what I mean? And the Pharisees are people who want nothing more than to see the Romans driven out. these two groups, the Herodians are supporting a man who's not even Jewish, who breaks the law all the time because he doesn't think it really applies to him, but then he uses it to try to prove how great of a Jew he is constantly. And then down here are the Pharisees, who are mostly from Judea. There were a few Galilean Pharisees, but for the most part, they're down here. And so these two groups, there is almost nothing on the table that they agree with but one thing. Jesus needs to be dead. Okay? That's what they agree on. And that neither of the groups have anything to do with the chief priests or the scribes or the elders, because they're all what? Sadducees who rule the temple. Now, is this making sense? Does this make sense to you? You get what I'm saying? So, I mean, I've gone a long way out of this, but it says, later the leaders sent some. Now, think about this a minute. There's nothing in common between the chief priests and the Herodians. They except that they both know that the Romans are keeping them in power. And the Pharisees have nothing to do with the elders, particularly, and they certainly don't want to have anything to do with the Herodians. And yet, here they are. They go, well, he got us on that last one. We're going to send you guys because both of you are on opposite sides of whatever he answers. And so here's the deal. They're going to ask him a question that if he says one thing, he'll make one group of that have come to him mad, and they'll go off and tell everybody that Jesus said that, and that'll get people riled up. But if he says the other thing, it'll make the other group mad, and they'll go off and tell everybody that Jesus said this, and Jesus can't win no matter what he does. That's what they have done. And this is really sneaky. And it says to trap Jesus. Now, this is a great word. I'm going to show you what it actually means. What am I doing? I'm catching a fish. It means to hook a fish. That's what it means. It's a violent word. It's a word when you catch an animal in a trap, a real trap, and it's trying to get away, but its leg is caught. That's what they're trying to do to Jesus. And they're trying to trap him into saying something. What? And it's just so he'll be arrested. That's kind of a nice way to put it, but it's really like so that he'll make one half of the world so mad that they'll want to kill him. And so they've got a question that can't possibly be answered in any other way than you're going to make half the world mad. Okay? But they begin and they're so like buttering him up. Teacher, they say. They didn't think of him as a teacher. Don't believe it or not. There's not a chance that the Herodians thought of Jesus as a teacher. You know, they're from the same place that he's from. And they want him dead. So they're not listening to him as a teacher. And the Pharisees, they've been trying to check him out from a distance. You remember all those times when he was up north in Galilee and it said Pharisees from Jerusalem came and he got in their faces? They didn't go up there and find out, well, we need to listen to him. He's a teacher that we need to listen to. It's a very, very respectful title that they don't believe at all. And then they go, well, it really says we know how you are true. This is an okay translation, how honest you are. It says you're impartial and don't play favorites. It really says something to the effect of that you don't look upon the face, is what it actually says. So they start out by saying, we know that you only speak the truth. Now, guys, this is a trap because he's supposed to be a godly teacher. And so if he only ever says what is true, and they're saying you only say what is true, that they're saying everything you say you believe God agrees with, that you're only speaking what God believes. So if he says something that they don't agree with, they can say he's blaspheming and saying God says this. And then it says that you're impartial and you don't play favorites. Or really, that thing about you don't look on the face. It's a colloquial phrase that has. Then it's hard to put it into our own thinking, but it's got to do with the notion that they thought that physical beauty equaled deep character. And so he doesn't look at the face and make a decision as to whether somebody's valuable or not based on how good they look. Because, I mean, I hate to be this way, but we tend to give people more credibility if they're good looking than we do if they're not good looking. But they actually believed it was existentially true, that beautiful people were given the beauty that they had because God had also given them deep character. Now, I have to say that was still a Western thought, probably right up until the middle of the Enlightenment. They really believed that, and they particularly men believe that about women. But they're saying to Jesus, you aren't a respecter of persons. So go ahead, Jesus, and offend somebody if you have to. We know you're going to tell the truth, but go ahead and offend them if you have to. Now, this is a way to, I love it. It says, you teach the way of God truthfully. They're doubling up on that one. Again, they're saying, okay, Jesus, we know that what you're going to say, you fully believe with all your heart and soul, and you don't care who's listening, that what you're saying is what God believes. And then they throw this question at him. It says, tell us, it's really, may we pay the census, or census is what it is, or not? That's all they say. May we pay that? And I'll explain that in a minute. But, you know, if you don't think you should, and Jesus says you should, then he's just said God says you should. And he doesn't care what you think. And if you think you should pay it, and he says you shouldn't, well, then he's just said God is against what you have to say, and he doesn't care what you think. Now, is that going to make people mad or what? And also the best part about this is that one half of the people who are going to be upset if he says you're not supposed to pay the tax are the Romans. Okay? So we got a lot going on here. Now we just have to stop a minute and talk about what they're talking about. It doesn't say pay taxes. It's a particular tax. It's the toll tax. Archelaus, in the year 6 AD, implemented, and he's the son of Herod the Great, who was in charge of Judea and Idumea and Samaria. He is the person who instituted the census tax. Do you know how when Joseph had to go to Bethlehem because of the census? That's what we're talking about. And there was a big one that came every 6 or 7 years, and then there was one every year. And every resident of those three places, Judea, Idumea, and Samaria, had to pay 1 denarius. And interestingly, every commentary I read said that that's equal to about 1 shilling. I have no idea what a shilling is worth, but I think it was the same amount as a day's work in their world. That's what people earned a day. Everyone earned a denarius for and he said everybody has to pay this poll tax once a year. They gathered the money to pay the Romans for their garrison that stayed there to keep them safe, and to pay for some of the road work and stuff, which was mostly for the military anyway. But that particular tax was so offensive to the Jews for 2 reasons. They said they had to pay it with a denarius. A denarius is a small silver coin. At the time, on one side, it had the face of Caesar, and around it, it said, Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. Caesar, son of the divine, Caesar, Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. Now, you all know what the word divine means. It means God, a God. And so, on the other side, it had just said, the high priest. Now, can I just tell you how offensive that would be to the Jews? First off, it had an image of somebody on it, and they all thought that was an idol. Secondly, that idol, the face on there, was claiming to be divine, that his father was a god and that he was a son of God. And on the other side, he was taking the title of the top position in the Jewish religious system. The initial response to Archelaus, who was a Herod, who was claimed to be a Jew, was what was called the Galilean revolt. It's mentioned in Acts that it happened 20 years before Jesus. It is one of the great failures of revolution in history. What ended up happening was thousands of Jews were slaughtered, along with Judas of Galilee. They killed him thinking everybody'd fall away, but the reason was they were just furious that they were being forced to use a coin that they didn't. You know that a lot of the Pharisees wouldn't touch it, and the best of the Pharisees wouldn't even look at it. Such was their hatred of this coin. But they had to pay this. There's 20 years after the Judas revolt, the Jews themselves as a people are still mad about it. They don't want to touch that coin. They don't want anything to do with it. And this is a trap, because they say, is it right for us to pay the toll tax? No, it says, may we pay the poll tax, or may we not? That's how the Greek reads. May we pay it, or may we not? And this is a time for us to stop. This is a great place to stop, because we'll come back at it hard on this. But think about what they just asked him. Okay, if you're a Jew, particularly a Pharisaic Jew, a guy who's not even going to touch the coin, maybe not even look at it, what if Jesus tells them, I think you need to pay the tax? Yeah, just pay the tax. That's not going to go over very well. There are tons of people in the crowd who probably have relatives who got slaughtered by the Romans because of Judas of Galilee, who's led them in a revolt against paying the tax. And then Jesus says, God says, you need to pay the tax, and I don't care what you think if you don't agree with me? Or what if he says, no, you shouldn't pay the tax? Well, all those people will go, yay! And what if we got in a Passover week in the courts of the temple, we have a whole bunch of people who are cheering and yelling and saying, we're not paying the tax. And the Herodians are people who are going to go right straight to Pilate, who had been brought in to take over for Archelaus, because Archelaus couldn't rule those places. And so they had to put a client king from Rome. They had to find the one guy they need to punish the most. And they sent Pilate to Jerusalem and said, take care of those Jews. And he eventually, I don't know if you know this, but the reason he finally got taken out of his position, because he was so mean to everybody. He was sent there to be what? A take names and kick you-know-what person to keep those nasty Jews in line. And what if he heard there was a guy in the temple during Passover week when there are 10 times the number of Jews in town, and he's yelling out, God told me that you're not supposed to pay the tax to the Romans with our coin, and I don't care what you think. What's going to happen? Thus, that's where we are. Now, that's a great place to stop. But I think you get the point of the story. You see what's going on here? This is a big trap. When they say trap, they definitely mean hook. They definitely mean hook. Because they want Jesus what? Dead. Okay, that's good. So I'll see you next week. Okay, and we'll finish this up.